everyone, welcome to this YouTube channel. For you today, again, for the sixth time, I have Anthony Lewis on. Hi Anthony, how are you?
Good to see you again.
So let me introduce you just a little bit for the people who don't know you. You are an American astrologer, a researcher, you're a retired psychiatrist. So you've been working your whole life with people on a therapeutic level. Have you used astrology in your practice?
Generally not, because people don't come to see me for charts. I mean, I'm always aware of the astrology, but unless somebody specifically wanted to see me via astrology, I wouldn't bring it up.
I read that Jung used it extensively in his practice also. He used
Right, he did, yeah.
And so I thought
he was known for doing that.
He was also known for it, obviously, yeah. Yes. He also wrote a very interesting book on astrology. So I think it's quite interesting that he actually used it in his practice also to see what is going on with the person, to get that perspective.
Well, he was interested in the symbolism of the unconscious mind. And so he saw the symbols of astrology as, since they were created by human minds, as reflecting what was going on in the unconscious mind.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Now, today we're going to talk about the Yogini Dasa, which is a nakshatra-based dasha used in Hindu astrology or Vedic astrology. Of course, you are a Hellenistic astrologer. You have researched Yogini a couple of months ago. You started using it, researching it, and I came across a nice prediction you made, and so I thought it was, it's worthwhile discussing that. How did you go about it? And then also elaborate a little bit on Yogini Dasha itself, how it is calculated, perhaps. I understand you prepared some slides and have some examples and so on. So I'm very curious about your findings, and I'll just have you do.
So, well, I took you up on your offer, and I will talk about the prediction because I was very impressed with it myself. Let me preface this by saying my background is in Western astrology. I grew up in the United States, and at the time I grew up, what was available was just mainly the modern astrology. And then in the 70s and 80s, people started getting into the more traditional historical texts, and I got really interested in that. I studied Lilly extensively in the 80s, and since then have been, when new translations become available, I try to read them and work with the charts and see how those techniques work. So I'd call myself an eclectic astrologer, not necessarily Hellenistic, but I like all the Western techniques. I've experimented with them all, since I like them all. And you'll see in this example, I begin with a Western technique and then switch to the Yogini. Now, how I got interested in Yogini, very briefly, biographically, about a year ago, I needed heart surgery. And so during the recovery period, I was really limited. The doctor wouldn't let me leave the house, drive, lift more than 5 pounds. So to pass the time, I decided to start learning something about Vedic astrology, because I really knew almost nothing about it. So I did a lot of reading in Vedic astrology during my recuperation period and began experimenting with the techniques. So I'm a real beginner. And last June, I had been invited to Spain to give a talk on solar returns. So I was doing a lot of research into solar returns, the Hellenistic, Arabic, Persian techniques, which is what my talk was about. But for thoroughness, I thought I would look at the Vedic approach as well, or the Hindu approach. And I got a book, I'll show you by Charak. This book, do you know this book?
Yes.
And so I went through this book, and he made use of this thing called Yogini Dashas, which I'd never heard of. And he looks at them as part of his solar return interpretation. So that every year there's a new Yogini Dasha in effect at the time of the solar return, and he uses that to make his interpretation. And it seemed to me a strange system when I read about it. He says it only covers 36 years of life, and then it repeats.
Yes.
And to get your Yogini Dasha, you have to take your birth nakshatra, add 3 to that, starting with Ashwini as the first, and then divide by 8 and look at the remainder. And I said, that's a bizarre formula. How the hell did they get at that? And what does adding 3 come from? I have no idea. If you do, I mean, you're the expert in this stuff. So.
I'm not. I mean, I have it in my software. I haven't researched Yogini at all. I'm using.
Yeah. But you know a lot about the Vedic approach and the various.
I know a lot about the Vedic approach, but in Vedic astrology, there is it's a vast ocean. I prefer all stuff that is nakshatra based. I'm not really inclined to deeply go into. Because I really like the Gemini Rashi dashas, you know, very clean cut and simple. Well, you know, depends on how you translate those sutras, of course.
Well, we'll see. When you see this example, you can see, because I don't know the Gemini system. So
sure, but I do use Vimshatri dasha extensively, and have been using it and have been predicting with it for you know, years. But specifically Yogini Dasha, I haven't researched. That's what I'm saying. I know what it is. I know how it's calculated and so on. I have software, but I haven't really used it in my practice to actually predict things.
So, well, coming from Western astrology, the dashas felt very comfortable to me, even though I wasn't familiar with them, because I had learned zodiacal releasing, which is a dasha system. And years ago, I had learned the Ferdaria system.
Yeah, it's the Persian system,
And so they're basically dasha systems. So I was very familiar with how things progressed and how you might use them to interpret a chart. And so it felt, the dasha systems feel very natural to me because I was using the Western techniques, but not the specific ones in Vedic. So over the summer, I had a couple of occasions where people asked me questions, and since I'd read about Yogini and got interested, I thought, well, I'll try it to see if I can predict with it. And I did 2 or 3 predictions that really impressed me with how precise and accurate it was. And so I started reading more about it. And also there's a number of videos on YouTube that I watched. So let's go through. Let me put my slides on. There's about 30 slides that I'm going to go through the example in detail. But I thought I did a little, quote, historical background. Apparently the word yogini in Sanskrit is a term for a female practitioner of yoga, a master practitioner, which is interesting. But it has another meaning, which I think has more to do with the dasha system. The yoginis are a set of goddesses, female goddesses, representing the sacred feminine force, aspects of Parvati. They're worshipped in India, and they're apparently worshipped in 2 forms. There's a set of 8 of them, and there's a set of 7 of them. And it's geographical, depending on whether you're in southern India or near to Nepal.
Yes.
7 or 8 of them. And it seemed to me these must be the root of the dasha system, that these 8 goddesses, mother goddesses, each get a period of life, and then the cycle repeats through 8. This is from Wikipedia. The 7 or 8 matrikas, or divine mothers.
Yes.
And I'll skip these, just name them in the middle, but the bottom part. They're usually depicted as a group of 7, the Sapta matrika. They may also be 8 matrikas called the Ashta matrika. I guess Ashta is 8, right?
Yes.
In South India, they worship the 7, and near Nepal, they worship the 8. And what's interesting is the Yogini Dasha system apparently is very popular in Nepal. And one of the videos I'm going to show you that I learned from, the astrologer learned the technique in Nepal.
I had a reading 10 years ago of a geshe, like a monk. And it was very interesting. It was the first time he'd been in the monastery for practically his whole life. And then he made a trip to Europe. It was the first time he made a trip to Europe. And I got to read him with, I had 2 friends with me. and they were using that specific dasha also, which is very
Well,
interesting.
apparently it's very popular in Nepal from what I've read. This is just a speculation on my part. I was thinking about the sky and the group of 7 stars, the 7 sisters of the Pleiades. I don't know if this has any relation to the Matrikas and the Yoginis, but these stars, the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, they really appear in many cultures as 7 female forces. This is a nice picture from NASA where the planet Venus is about to go through them. I like the picture. This may or may not have any relevance to the topic. So what are the Yogini Dashas? I look back at the ancient, traditional literature, and this is a quote from chapter 46 of the Brihat Parashara Ora Shastra.
Shastra, yes.
Yeah. I will acquaint you with the Yogini Dashas. There are 8 of them, and they named them. And then each of these 8 is associated with a planet. And it says the planets are born from these dashas. Because these are the divine mothers, and the planets, they give birth to the planets. That's an interesting idea.
Yes.
And so there are planets associated with each dasha, which are the mothers. To get your personal Yogini Dasha at birth, you take your birth nakshatra, add 3, divide by 8, look at the remainder, and that gives you the number of your dasha. But because the moon will be somewhere within the nakshatra, you have to do like with Vimshotri, you have to do the proportion and find out how much of the dasha is left to cover after birth. Okay, the standard technique. Let me go on. Now, it occurred to me, I was thinking about the number 8. And so this is my speculation. This is not in the literature. In Hellenistic astrology, there was a very early tradition of dividing either the entire horoscope or part of it into 8 sections, which covered the lifespan. It was called the 8 tropos turnings or topos topics. Both words occur in the literature. And if you look at it, this then got merged with the 12th house system, at least topically. But these 8 divisions, which were a part of early Hellenistic astrology, the first section was the life itself, second, the manner of living, third, siblings, fourth, parents and their possessions, fifth, the children, sixth, injuries to the body, seventh, marriage and the wife, eighth, fortune and the end of life and death. And so it occurred to me that maybe there is this old tradition that's common to both Vedic and Hellenistic of dividing the life into 8 sections. Because this is basically what Yogini is doing. There's 8 sections and then they cycle through the life. So what are the Yogini Dashas? There are 8 of them. They have these names. These are the names of the Dashas, the 8 divine mothers who gave birth. These are the children of the mothers. And each child or planet gets a certain amount of time to influence your life.
So Ketu is the 9th planet, right? So we have a full cycle.
No, they don't. Ketu is not included in this.
It's not included, but I mean, Ketu is the number 9, so it has,
right.
It's a deep, long tradition of this, the 8 cycle.
Okay, yeah. The moon
what you were saying, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, sure. The moon gets 1 year, the sun gets 2 years. Jupiter 3, Mars 4, Mercury 5, Saturn 6, Venus 7, Rahu 8. And the other pattern here is that it alternates between the more benefic and the more malefic. So moon, sun, benefic, malefic, Jupiter, Mars, benefic, malefic, Mercury, Saturn, benefic, malefic, Venus, Rahu, benefic, malefic. So there's this sequence within 1 year is relatively good, the next year is relatively difficult, and it goes that way throughout. Actually, 1 period, not year. So the periods have different lengths of years. And
yes.
the number in the sequence is the number of years that the planet influences or governs. Okay. And as you can see, if you add these up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you get 36 years, and then the cycle starts over again. And that's one of the criticisms of Yogini. Some astrologers say, well, it's going to get very mechanical because every 36 years you're going to have the same patterns exactly repeating in your life, and that doesn't make sense. That's an objection.
Well, you know, I think it's the fact that there's so many dashas given by Parashara shows that life is not really easily predicted
by one technique. Yeah, I think all astrologers know you can't rely on a single technique.
Or a single dasha, even.
Right. You have to look at multiple techniques, multiple dashas, transits, progressions in Western astrology, solar returns. It's not that simple. And in fact, the use of it with the solar return is a good example. Every year there'll be a different Yogini Dasha influencing the year at the time of the solar return. Okay, so next. The 36, it occurred to me that, again, in ancient Hellenistic, 36 was a really important number to the Egyptians, astrologers, because they divided the sky into 36 decans. And those became very influential in their predictive system. And they've come down to us as the decanates or the faces or the decans. Hindu astrology uses them too, right? The decans.
Yes.
Division of the circle into 36 segments. And then in Hindu astrology, this number 108 keeps coming up as important. And three cycles of 36 decans is 108 years. 4 cycles of 27 nakshatras is 108. So it's interesting how these numbers became, there's like a numerological basis to all of this as well.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting, if you add this up to 12, 8 plus 9 plus 10 plus 11 plus 12, you're going to get 78, which is the number of cards in the tarot deck, which I think is not accidental.
Definitely.
The 36 decans of ancient Egypt, I think I just said all this, so I won't read it. Well, this is interesting, though. The decan lore of Hephaestio, he's one of the ancient Hellenistic astrologers, shows the rising decan to indicate physical appearance and character traits. That's your first decan, your first house, basically. Topics assigned to certain decanates numbered relative to it, notably the spouse is in the 17th decan, which falls in the 7th house or 7th sign. And your livelihood, your way of making a living, falls in the 28th decan, which is the 10th house or 10th sign. So it's interesting how the decans, the 36 divisions, got incorporated into the house system, both in Vedic and Hellenistic house systems. And 36 is also the number of years in the Yogini cycle.
Yes.
So my guess is they're somehow related, and that there probably was some sharing of influence between Egypt and India and Arab, Persian countries. And so these concepts got formulated in different ways in different cultures. So here are the years per planet. This is the Thema Mundi, which we talked about at one time. And I was wondering if there was some connection between the Thema Mundi and the Yogini sequence. And it occurred to me that if we look at the exaltations of the planet, so here's my speculation again. Nobody has said this as far as I know. Like the Thema Mundi, we start with the moon and the sun, first and second. And then we take the exaltation in Cancer, which is Jupiter. We look for the exaltation in Leo. There is none, but the sun is exalted in Aries, so we get Mars. We look next at Mercury, who's both exalted and rules the next sign. Then we look at the exaltation of Libra, which is Saturn. And then we put Venus, which rules that sign. And then Rahu comes at the end because he doesn't really have a sign. It seemed to me there was some connection between exalting the planets and the sequence of the Yogini Dashas. This is the objection. If you because they last 36 years and repeat exactly after 36 years, some astrologers reject them and say it's too mechanical. K.N. Rao says he doesn't have any problem with that, but maybe there's a way to fix it or to revise it. He said the ticklish question is how to apply this dasha in people who are older, basically. So let me move on. So the solution, that there's this astrologer called Goel, G-O-E-L, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He wrote a book. He came up with a theory. He was a student of K.N. Rao. And
Yes.
apparently in the classes, they were studying Yogini Dashas, and he was trying to make them work for people over 36 years of age. And he came up with this idea of progressing the nakshatra, the birth nakshatra, through the lifetime, so that every so many years would be a new birth nakshatra. You'd go all the way around the wheel, and that would take you 3 times 36, which is what, 108 years. So that should cover most human lifetimes. And each period would then be different. And the idea he had, I don't think he says it this way, but it occurred to me that what he's doing here is, you know, the famous image of the Ouroboros, the snake biting its tail.
Yes.
That if you start with your birth nakshatra here, you go around the wheel, and then there's an overlap at the end of the sequence of nakshatras. The final nakshatras overlap with the initial nakshatras of the cycle, so that it's not that the nose of the snake touches its tail, it's that the mouth of the snake actually overlaps its tail. And so the final 3 nakshatras in the 27 nakshatra cycle overlap with the first 3, and you have a sequence of 24, 3 times 8. That makes sense? And he said, if we do it that way, and then we use that nakshatra sequence, we can have a kind of a new ascendant with every new yogini. It's a progressed nakshatra. It's actually more, it's that, but it's like progressing the moon from birth through the nakshatras at the rate of the yoginis. So this is V.P. Goel. He talked progressing the nakshatra.
Yes.
And this is a quote from him directly. So let's go through it, because he came up with this idea, and I think it's a very useful idea. So, and we'll see examples of it. What you have to know is that each yogini is linked to a nakshatra. Okay. You start with the moon's birth nakshatra and proceed 1 nakshatra forward with each change in yogini. And the yoginis can have different numbers of years. But every time you switch the yogini, you switch the nakshatra.
Yes.
He says, for instance, if your moon is in Rohini, your first yogini will be Venus, because your Rohini is associated with Venus. And then Rohini is associated, we said that. After Venus comes Rahu, because Venus is 7, Rahu is 8. And Rahu will be then associated with the next nakshatra after Rohini. So the nakshatra linked with the Yogini Dasha becomes a progressed lagna. And it's actually, you really have to progress the moon, because the moon can start late in the nakshatra, and when it switches to the next one, the ascendant will switch too. So here's what the cycle looks like. The cycle, there's 8 members of the cycle, moon through Rahu. It starts with Ardra, the 6th nakshatra, and goes the first 8, the second 8, the third 8, but in here, 25 overlaps with 1, 26 with 2, 27 with 3. This is where the snake is biting its tail. And so if you follow this, there's basically 27 members of the sequence, because we have the overlap of these 3. And oh, that's interesting. I wonder if maybe that's where the 3 comes from. You add 3 and divide by 8.
Yeah, well,
Okay. That actually makes sense. Because there's the overlap of 3, and these are cycles of 8. There's 3 cycles of 8. You need to preserve the sequence moon, sun, Jupiter, Mars, blah, blah, blah. If you,
that's 24, yeah. 8 is 24, so you have,
if you switched from, Revati, which is Saturn,
Yes.
to 1, which is Ashwini, you'd go
Yeah.
from Saturn to Mars, which would break the sequence.
Yes. Yes.
He says
So,
what's important is the Yogini sequence. So we have to make the nakshatra sequence match the Yogini sequence.
Sure. Yeah.
Do this by overlapping. So maybe that's where the 3 comes from, moving the 27 down to 24. I mean, my other thought about it was that in ancient texts, Kritika was the first nakshatra.
Yeah.
And if you add 3 to that, 1, 2, 3, you get to the first member of the cycle. Another possibility. This is the same slide. I just put the sidereal coordinates. Now this slide is actually from a video by, I don't know who this guy is. He publishes under Lunar Astro on YouTube. He has a number of videos. He learned the system in Nepal, and the technique I'm going to use, I learned from him in his video. And so he goes through the sequence of dasha. He gives some keywords. These are standard keywords for the planets. But what's interesting, well, I'll get there. I'm not going to belabor because these are fairly standard, right? Rahu, sudden, unexpected events, etc. Blah blah blah. I just wanted to say where I got a lot of the ideas from that I used. Now, this is from the same video that I just showed. His example. This is an example he gives, and I wanted to go over his technique because I used it in my prediction. He had a client who was 38 and a half years old. And in March of this year, the client found out that his job was going to probably relocate him during the year to another city. And he didn't know when that would be. And he asked the astrologer, when will I be relocated? When will they have me move to another city to work? And the astrologer said in July. You're going to move in July using Yogini Dashas. And he said, that's because in July, you're in Yogini, Venus, Venus, Jupiter. So if we look at the chart, Venus rules his ascendant. It's in his 3rd house. Jupiter's in his 4th house. And let's see.
Well, Jupiter is the 8th lord.
And yeah.
And the 3rd is definitely also moving.
Right.
And
3rd
it's in the
is
4th
moving.
house of
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he didn't, in the video, he didn't use a progressed, the Goel progressed, but his progressed moon, using that previous slide, moves to Uttara Phalguni, is in the 4th. So home and family, his residence becomes a major issue during this Jupiter period.
Yes. And also the 8th lord in the 4th house indicates a change of home.
Right. So this is the Yogini Dasha system. They use the planets instead of the names of the Yoginis. Venus, Venus. He looked ahead at Venus, Venus, and saw that the Jupiter period would be end of June to early August. So he said, probably July, you're going to move. Okay. Going back to the chart, here's part of his reasoning. Venus rules the 1st and the 6th, which is his daily work. Venus lies in the 3rd, change of place. Rahu is in the 3rd. He says, he uses Rahu as representing the 10th of career because Rahu is similar to Saturn.
That's true. I mean, Rahu gives the results of Saturn.
Right. Rahu gives the results of Saturn.
He's a 10th lord, so yeah. Okay.
Right. And Saturn's the 10th lord. And Rahu's in the 3rd, so probably a change in career. Moon rules the 3rd and lies in Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter. So he's thinking when this gets activated, Moon, Rahu, Cancer. So Venus, Rahu, Cancer.
Yeah.
And when this gets activated, Jupiter and Moon, those are times when a move is likely. Therefore, there should be a job-related change of place when Venus, Rahu, Moon, Jupiter, or Jupiter activated. And so Venus, Jupiter was the most likely candidate available from the as from this description.
Mm-hmm.
So that's his logic. Using the third as signifying change of career was new to me. I mean, I knew the third had to do with change, and since at the same time I was looking at this video, somebody was asking me, I'm applying for this job, will I get it? Will I change jobs? This was very relevant, and I happened to watch this video almost the same day that this other person asked me a similar question.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I'll look at his chart and focus on the third house as well.
Yes.
In terms of Hellenistic, it's interesting in Hellenistic astrology, the joy of the moon rejoices in the third, and the reason often given is that the moon represents change. It goes through rapid changes of phase,
Sure.
and it rapidly moves through the zodiac. So the house that signifies change is the third house.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess in Mars, I mean, in Vedic, Mars is also associated with the third.
Yes.
As a
Also in
restless.
Tajika, also they give the favorable position for moon is this the second and the third.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so a change of place or starting something new or changes in your life are reflected in the third house. Okay, so this is my example. So, and what's in the synchronicity is interesting because I had watched that video probably within a day or two of getting the question from this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So this is someone I know. In late August, he had asked me, will I get this job? And if so, when would I get it? Now, the story is, I don't want to say too much personal stuff to protect his identity, but this guy's a mechanic. He's a skilled mechanic
Mm-hmm.
working in a place that he doesn't make a lot of money. He's really good at what he does, but he barely makes enough money to pay his expenses. So he's looking for a new job.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows a bunch of mechanics in the area, and a couple of them had gone to work for, there's a company near where he lives that does a lot of work for the US government.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were looking for, he heard through his friends that they were looking for people with good mechanical skills because they had a project they were starting. And so he heard about this late July, early August, decided to apply, inquired about the job. He had to put together a resume, which he did like around mid-August, sent it in, got an interview toward the end of August, and that's when he asked me the question. I'm going for this interview, will I get the job? And if so, when? And so in late August, I was also watching this video that I just showed you. So I thought I would look at his chart, and this is his sidereal chart. The reason I used sidereal here was that the guy I had learned it from was using sidereal. I thought I better not change too many things. I better stick to the technique as closely as I can before I start playing with changing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay,
well, I
so
think that's true. Also, like Ken Rao, for example, he uses sidereal zodiac, if you use this techniques, you really have to use sidereal zodiac.
Right. So I used traditional Lahiri. I tried to keep as traditional as I could. Okay. So here we are. Let's go on. But to start, I always begin with the tropical chart because that's what I'm more familiar with. And I always look at primary directions as one of my main techniques to get a general sense of the life. So he was 35, let's say 0.6 years old at the end of August. And so what I do is I calculate a primary directed chart, or my version of it. The idea of primary directions is that each degree of right ascension, each on the equator that crosses the midheaven, is 1 year of life. So I advance the chart roughly 4 minutes for each of the 35.6 years of life. The figure I use is actually this one, and I don't want to go into explanation. And so here is his birth chart in the tropical system. And primary directions, basically, after birth, the Earth continues to move, so all these points continue to rise. And so at some point, Aries, for instance, is going to get to the midheaven. He was roughly 36 years old, and the distance from here, well, I'm sorry, the end of Pisces to his birth midheaven was roughly 36 degrees. In right ascension, it's almost exactly 36 degrees. So I knew that very shortly he would be having a change of sign on his midheaven in primary directions. Changes of sign are very, very significant. They usually represent major changes in the life.
Sure.
In this guy's life, he had a change here, maybe about age 8 or so, whatever that meant. Then this change will be roughly 35, 36, and this change will be Aries to Taurus, 36 plus 30 would be 66. So in his lifetime, he's only going to have a couple of these changes. And so I did the calculation. At the time he asked me the question, his birth chart primary directed looked like this. His midheaven was at 29, I think that's 38, yeah. So you can see that within the next few months, he'll have this sign change. This provided I have an accurate birth time. His birth time was from his birth certificate, so I'm pretty sure it was close, within a minute probably. But because there was only about 20 minutes of arc to go, each 5 minutes is a month. So within 4 months, he'd have this change. So September, October, November, December. By December, I was pretty confident there'd be a major career change in his life. So based on that alone, I said, yes, you will get this job. But he wanted to know when. So I was convinced he'd get the job from the primary directions. So I told him, you're going to get the job. The question is when. It's probably going to be by December. But so then it occurred to me, let me use Yogini, because I had the period from September to December to look at, to try to pinpoint when in that period he'd get the job. Okay, so far so good?
Definitely.
Okay, so next I looked at Yogini, and I was doing this really out of curiosity. I wasn't sure it would work or not, but I thought, what the hell, I'll give it a try. So he was born with his moon at the end of Chitra. He had only 54 minutes left in Chitra. So he's born in late Chitra. Chitra is paired with Mangala, which is the moon, right? So that's a year of life. And I did the proportions. He had only like 25 days left before he switched to the sun after birth. Okay. So if we look at this, he's born here at the very end of Chitra. He's almost 36. So his progressed nakshatra, 36 would take him to here, to Shravana. Okay. So I knew that this area of his chart would be really prominent this year by the VP Goel method. Okay. And we'll see what that looks like in his chart. And then I looked at this is his Vedic sidereal chart. 1919, he's in a moon period, so it's a 1 year period. So this year he's in his moon period, Yogini. He's in his Saturn sub-period, and this seemed to fit very perfectly. He heard about the job the end of July. He spent August doing the resume, getting the interview. And he still had a number of things to complete the application, and he thought he would complete it mid-September. And the complication was, because this was government work, there was kind of a security check. He had to provide detailed information about everything he'd done for the past 7 years of his life with documentation. And so he was kind of going nuts, writing to schools for transcripts and giving exact dates where he'd moved in different parts of the country during 7 years. They wanted to know the exact address and the exact dates he lived at each address and so on. So he was gathering all this information. He thought it would take him a couple weeks to get all the documentation in. And plus, at the end, they had scheduled him to have a a drug test to be sure he wasn't abusing drugs, and that was scheduled for September 16th. And that was the final. They wanted him to get all the documentation in by the 16th. No, by the 16th when they did the drug test. And then they told him once the documentation was all in, it would take them 4 to 6 weeks to process it and give him an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes perfect sense that he's really going nuts with all this documentation, by also working full time and doing this in his spare time. And so this date, September 19th, seemed to match perfectly with what he expected to be the end of the application period.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that he would hear, so I narrowed it down just from his story, sometime between mid-September and the end of October, he'd get an answer. So I'd like a 6 or 8 week period to narrow down into. I put the sun here because this is the week he asked the question. I thought that was interesting. In this period, the sun period, sub-period here, sun is in the 9th house,
Mm-hmm.
which has a lot to do with astrology, seeking help from the guru.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to seek an answer from the astrologer right here. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I thought, let's see, did I leave anything out? Okay. So let me go to the next slide. So I looked at his Yogini Dashas, and the period from the end of the application process, which was about the 19th of September, through October 3rd was a Venus period. And I thought Venus, there's 2 really benefic planets in the chart, Jupiter and Venus.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought probably you'd hear about the job during Jupiter or Venus. I picked this period to start with because Venus is Venus is conjunct Jupiter and it rules his ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
Venus also rules the 6th, which I took to mean his current work position. This is his daily drudgery. And I thought it was significant that the moon, which rules a 3rd of change, was in the 6th, ruled by Venus, which is conjunct Jupiter.
Yeah.
So I was looking for a Venus subperiod and got to this one. And then I looked in this Venus subperiod and thought, well, Venus-Jupiter, that looks like a great time to get a job offer. And I said, I thought he'd hear during this period, the 26th to 27th.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was on the 26th at about 3:30 in the afternoon, I got this text message saying, I just heard from them, they gave me the job.
Yes, that's
that's
very interesting.
So I was like, holy shit.
Yes, that's like to put on your wall, right?
Right. And I wasn't really expecting this to work. I was expecting it to be ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came out exactly, I thought, oh my God, this is weird. Was this just luck on my part, or is there something to this?
Well, there was some synchronicity happening, of course, first with you and the class, then testing it out, and then slam. And I hear from astrologers, colleagues, often it happens like this. You put your mind onto something, you learn something, and then you use it and it happens. Right. Or this weird synchronicity is happening. But if you look at the chart, I think the Venus period, Venus rules the 10th Lord Saturn, who's exalted, of course.
Right. There's an exalted Saturn. Yeah, that's a reason I didn't think it was so bad to have the 6th house emphasized.
Yes.
Well, if you look at the moon, rules the 3rd, which is change. The moon is in the 6th with an exalted Saturn. Mm-hmm. And the dispositor of all this is Venus, which is in the 8th, which is the 3rd from the 6th. So change of this workplace.
It's the 3rd. It's the ascendant lord in the 8th, which shows a change, but then it rules Saturn, the 10th lord, and
Right.
is in the 8th house also.
Right.
So
and it's conjunct Jupiter,
yes, and
which is in its own sign, which is very dignified.
Mm-hmm.
So it really seemed to fit. So this is I posted this in my blog because I was so impressed. I doubt I could ever do this again. But
this is really great. Also, I think also Mercury helps. Mercury as the 5th lord, as one of the trine lords, also
right.
as a natural friend of Venus, helping out. And it shows again how important dispositors are, the dispositor of something of a lord, because it has to have some connection either with the 1st and 10th lords or house.
Now, what I didn't do, what he does in the video, to confirm this, he tries to confirm it in the D9 chart and the D10 chart. But I didn't do that because my mind can only do so much.
Yeah, well, I think the D9 chart is, the Navamsha chart is for many, many things. We often hear it's only for marriage and so on, and it is because it's about the ashram that you belong to, but it's for, all things in life. All important dharmic events will be definitely indicated in the Navamsha chart.
Yeah, but also it happens to have the same ascendant. And so here we have Moon, Venus. Moon still rules the 3rd. It's in the 7th. It's aspecting the Venus, the ascendant ruler. And Venus is the current job position. And where's Jupiter here? Jupiter's in the 2nd. So it's interesting. But I want to show you the next slide. This is his.
No, it's
do you want me to go back?
No, it's fine. I was just looking at the planetary aspects used. Saturn has a 3rd aspect, so Saturn aspects the 3rd from.
Right. This Saturn is really, it's exalted and it's aspecting the Venus, Jupiter, Mercury.
Yes, and when Saturn aspects a planet, when it aspects Venus, it's not going to hurt it. There's going to be some. It's Saturn, so it's that quality,
but Venus is also the dispositor of Saturn.
It's a dispositor, but it's also Saturn is also its friend, and who's of course the 10th lord and so on, and it's also the 9th lord, and we have all the Dharma lords connected to Venus and Jupiter also.
So to me that was, well, let me go down in here. This, I thought he'd get the job in this Venus period, and when I went through the sub periods, there is this early Venus sub-period. I thought that was much too early. He would have just completed the application. On the basis of common sense, I just said, they need time to process all his paperwork. They can't do it by 21st. It seemed unlikely Rahu would do it. Moon was a possibility because Moon could be changed. But I really wanted something much more benefic for a major career change, which he was looking forward to. So I picked Jupiter.
Yes, in the beginning, I thought when you went over Saturn, then I thought, okay, Saturn as the 10th lord, what's in the 6th house, but it's exalted. It's with the moon, right? Connecting to that 3rd lord. But that was too early. You got the question later. That was the time that
I got the question at the end of August.
Yeah.
And he didn't finish the application process. He knew he wouldn't finish the application process. The drug test was the 16th. He had to get all his paperwork in that week as well. And so it seemed to me this was much too early for them to even meet to review his application. So it had to be in this later period.
Yes.
And I thought Jupiter was the best bet.
Interesting.
So this next slide, here's his birth nakshatra. His moon is at the very end of Chitra. And at the time he asked the question, I did the proportions and calculate. The moon had moved to about 17 of Capricorn. So it was here in Shravana, in the 10th sign from his ascendant.
All
And
right.
these were the Hindu Baba houses, the porphyry cusps, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So right near this cusp. And so this was highlighted. And the Shravana nakshatra, I looked up, this is sort of hearing, and with
Yes.
the three footprints, which are the Vishnu stepping through the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So he heard about a job and he would be moving to a new location. That's
Great.
how I interpreted it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you can see it's right at the top of the chart in the 10th house, in Capricorn, and Saturn, which governs this area of the zodiac, is exalted in Libra.
Yes.
So this progressed, I'm calling it the progressed moon, the progressed nakshatra, really does seem, every time I've tried it, it really does seem very relevant to what's going on in the person's life in that period.
It's great. I think it's very interesting how how these things work. It's like, I mean, if I look back at predictions, accurate predictions I made to the day or within a few days, then most of the time it was like the whole periods preparing for that prediction is playing a role, or just already showing that, okay, this is going to be important. I once had to do a rectification for someone. And I did it in 2 hours, which was very, you know.
Oh my God!
Which is very.
It takes me 2 or 3 weeks.
It takes a long, long time, and I did it in 2 hours. I mean, and I knew it was absolutely, you know, correct birth time. I remember it was really amazing how smooth it went, and he gave me 35 events to verify. So, you know, plenty of events and so on, and he kept sending me events, and it was all lining up. At a certain point, I thought, okay, I'm gonna let's the proof's in the pudding, right? So I'm gonna make him a prediction for the coming week. And I made a prediction for him that came true, and he was absolutely convinced of that time. And I think I was his 5th rectification, but it was not. I did just applied my techniques, but I knew, you know, intuitively, I knew it was a birth time that he was going to be really working with, because who really knows? I mean, what is really accurate? You can test it by doing predictions, right? I mean, that's the whole point.
I think that's the way to do it. This chart, I think, shows very well. For the moon to get from here through all the nakshatras to here is going to take 108 years. And so this will cover the human lifespan, and there'll be something different in each period. Vic DeCara has an interesting video on the nakshatras, and I looked up his interpretation of Shravana. This guy, he had a goal, which was to get a better job using his skills, and he's in a period where he's using his inquisitiveness to get to his goal. Well, let me see if it also shows up in a couple other dasha systems. So this is the standard Vimsutari dasha system.
Yes, okay.
And here he is in a Saturn. Again, Saturn's exalted, so it's kind of nice. And Saturn's in his 6th, so focusing on his daily work. Here's his Venus sub-period here. From August 18th, which is when he first applies for the job, it goes through February of next year. And in the primary direction, I thought by December he would be changing career. So this fits perfectly this Venus period. And again, Venus is prominent in Yogini. Right?
Yes.
So that seemed to fit. And then I looked in the sub-periods of this Venus, and he gets the job in the Sun sub-period. And the Sun it's actually nicely placed. It's in the 9th. In Western, the Sun rejoices in the 9th. It's very favorably placed in the 9th. And the 9th is a fortunate house to begin with.
Sure.
So it makes sense that there's this overlap. In the Yogini, the Sun is really one of the malefics. So, but this is when he got the job, and it makes a lot of sense, I think. And then I looked at this Adasha system I don't really know much about, but I thought I would, the Charadasha.
Yes.
Here he's in an overall Scorpio period of many decades, and he's in the Libra sub-period. And Libra happens again to rule the seventh house in these planets, and Venus gets emphasized. And he gets the job in this moon sub-period, the Cancer sub-period, which again is the third house and changes, so job changes. That seems to fit very well.
Right.
So it's interesting that the various dasha systems all seem to converge with the same symbolism.
Interesting. Yeah, it should be, and also definitely should be indicated from multiple angles, from many
Oh,
dashas.
I have one more of the chara dashas. I think I went down another level, or did I? No.
Well, you can go through 3 levels, you know, if you really
Yeah.
want to be accurate. Yeah.
I'm not sure why I put this here. Is this the same slide? Oh, I know what I did here. Okay. One of the techniques, this is the standard birth chart. One technique with the chara dashas that this is same as the Pali astrologer talked about is you take your sub-period sign and make that the ascendant. So in the next slide, I put Libra as the ascendant. Here it's his birth ascendant, which is Taurus.
Yeah.
And so here I move Libra to the ascendant. And so again, it's a Libra Cancer. Libra's now on the ascendant.
Yes.
And Cancer moves to the 10th. So
yeah.
again, it's a career-related change.
So you didn't, do you know the Dasamsha, the 10th divisional chart?
I do, but I don't have it here.
All right. Well, it should also be indicated in the Navamsha chart, which was, what was it here? We have Scorpio, Libra, Cancer. So what Scorpio here is the 7th, it has the moon.
Right, so the moon again is there ruling the third, that's emphasized. Yes. And Libra is, where's our Libra here? Is this 6th, okay. And Cancer is the 3rd, yeah.
Yeah, when I use, so this is a Chara Dasha, it's like a Rashi Dasha. It's a,
right.
The Rashi Dasha, so it is about the signs that do it here, right? Then I prefer the South Indian chart style to see Rashi aspects. And it's easier to see. But I would also look here at the aspects, the Rashi aspects that these signs receive. Like Scorpio, for example, what does it actually Scorpio gets Rashi aspected by Capricorn, Aries, and Cancer, and see if that there's going to be manifesting influence to that sign, because it has to be, and especially Libra has to be strongly aspected, strongly manifested.
Well, it's got it's got Jupiter, right?
Well, Libra is aspected by Leo, Taurus, and Aquarius. Yeah, we have Mercury aspecting. See, so there's a manifesting Mercury aspecting. But yeah, Anthony, really great example. Yeah.
So it seems to be indicated from many points of view.
And also it's, afterwards, it's always easy to explain, but you made a prediction in the moment.
I was convinced from the primary directions that by the end of the year, he would have a new job. And this was the only prospect. so I was convinced he'd get this job. And the Yogini, I just was learning it. So I thought I'll try it and I'll do my best with the symbolism. And I explained my thinking. But when it turned out the exact day, I was just a little freaked. I thought, he'd hear within a couple of weeks. I thought I might be a week off. But when it came to the 26th at 3:30 p.m., I get this text. I said, oh my God.
I think the divine goddesses, the mothers were speaking with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you check what transits you were running at that time?
Actually, I didn't look at his transits. Interesting.
No,
that I was running.
His transits would also definitely be, it has to be showing, but yeah, the transits you were running.
No.
That's always, I think it's interesting to check.
Well, I've made a few other predictions with the Yogini that have been pretty accurate. Not as precise as this, but pretty close. And I know who's an astrologer. I looked at his progressed nakshatra, and it was actually very similar to this guy's. he had his, this isn't his chart, but his progressed nakshatra had entered his 10th house.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it looks to me like during this period, there's going to be a career advancement. And his response was, yeah, I just heard from my boss that they want to give me a promotion. So, and it fit the timing precisely. I mean, it was a span of like a couple months
Mm-hmm.
that I was looking at, but the time that the progression moved into his 10th house was when his boss said to him, which was recently, you're doing really well. We think you're due for a promotion. So I mean, to me, that's impressive.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Great.
So I'm really impressed with the progressed nakshatra idea, because it does seem to describe the period the person is going through. And this person I'm talking about, you know, he said, yeah, that's right. They're talking about promoting me on my job in the dates you're mentioning.
So I think if you combine all these techniques, then you get a clear picture. I mean, if they all line up, then you're safe to make it that.
My current period, I have a very active Saturn sub-period in Yogini.
Mm-hmm.
And Saturn in my chart rules the 4th and 5th. And in the past couple of weeks, my son needs a new car. So I decided to give him my old car, buy a new car for myself.
Right, 4th house. Mm-hmm.
And that's happening during these few weeks where I'm in my Saturn sub period.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting a new car and giving my old car to my son.
Interesting. Where is Saturn in your horoscope?
It's in the 10th.
So does it give you, I think it does, because you're also making these videos. Did you do that before, like videos and so on? Because you would become more visible with that, of course. I mean, especially as a yoga.
Well, you and I have been making videos the past few months, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't made many videos. I periodically do give talks. I gave the talk in Spain in June.
Yeah, exactly. You're teaching also with the Capital College and so on?
Right. So I've done things like that, but I've done that throughout my life, I think.
You've done that throughout, so
it's probably more so in the past year, much more so in the past year. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Looking forward to our next one.
Okay, good. Take care. Good to see you.